Welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be looking at the lives of two really fascinating figures from 19th century America,
Yeah.
Henry Highland Garnet and James McCune Smith.
Two incredible guys.
Yeah, and we're going to be using Anna Mae Duane's book, Educated for Freedom. The full title's a little long. The incredible story of two fugitive schoolboys who grew up to change a nation,
Wow.
to guide us through their stories and their world.
Yeah.
And you might be wondering, why should I care about these two guys who lived centuries ago?
Right.
But their stories really give us this look into the complexities of Black education and activism,
Okay.
and the shadow of slavery and colonization. Unfortunately, still very much relevant today.
Issues that we're still grappling with, absolutely. And what's so fascinating is how both of these men's journeys kind of converge at this really unique place.
Yeah,
The New York African Free School. Now, this wasn't just any school, especially for that time period.
right.
We're talking about a school dedicated to educating Black children in a nation where slavery was still very much a reality.
Yeah, that's a good point. It seems almost paradoxical. I mean, it was founded in the late 18th century, this idea of offering opportunity, but within a system that was really designed to limit it.
Absolutely, a crucible of contradictions.
Yeah.
And the school itself reflects that. It produced some really extraordinary graduates. James McCune Smith, the first African-American to earn an MD from a Western university, and Ira Aldridge, the first Black man to play Othello on the London stage.
Wow.
These achievements really speak to the potential, the talent that was nurtured within those walls.
Absolutely. But then at the same time, you have Charles C. Andrews, who was the schoolmaster at the time, and his views were, well, a little bit complicated.
A little bit.
He believed in the intellectual capabilities of his Black students,
Right.
but also supported the American Colonization Society,
Right.
the organization that advocated for sending Black people back to Africa.
Right. It's this tension that I think is so interesting. This internal conflict in the very institution meant to uplift Black students, I think, speaks to those larger anxieties about citizenship and adulthood that were really pervasive in 19th century America. Black people were often viewed as childlike and incapable of self-governance and therefore unfit for true American freedom.
Yeah.
So they were being educated for freedom,
Right.
but in a society that couldn't quite figure out where they belong.
That's a really interesting point. It makes you think about how these ideas about race and belonging are things we're still grappling with.
Oh, absolutely. And both Garnet and Smith had to wrestle with these conflicting messages in a really personal way, especially given their backgrounds. Henry Highland Garnet escaped slavery at 9 years old.
Wow.
Imagine the trauma of that experience.
Yeah.
And James McCune Smith, though born free, was the son of an enslaved mother.
That's incredible. They both had such a direct connection to the brutality of slavery, and yet they find themselves at this school that, while providing education, also presented this confusing message about their place in society.
It really highlights how deep-rooted these issues were and how even seemingly positive institutions could be entangled in these complexities of race and prejudice. And to really grasp their stories, I think we need to dive into their individual journeys,
Yeah.
starting with James McCune Smith and his really remarkable fight against scientific racism.
Okay, let's unpack that a little bit. So
Yeah.
Smith went on to study medicine in Glasgow and became, as we said, the first African-American to earn an MD degree.
Pioneering,
But he didn't stop there.
right.
He returned to the United States, and he really took on the prejudice that he had experienced, particularly in the realm of science.
And what's so striking is that this is happening during a time when so-called scientific theories were being used to justify racial hierarchies. I mean, take the 1840 U.S. Census report, for example. It made this outrageous claim that freedom was actually detrimental to Black health.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
You're saying they argued that slavery was good for Black people?
They suggested that slavery somehow shielded Black people from the burdens of adult life.
That seems unbelievable.
It does, doesn't it? But that's how deeply entrenched these racist ideas were.
Yeah,
They were even trying to dress them up as science.
right.
But Smith wasn't having any of it. He used his medical expertise, his sharp analytical mind, to really dismantle these claims. He meticulously analyzed the data, exposed the flawed logic behind these theories, and just called them out for what they were: pseudoscience.
I'll admit, I'm not really familiar with that term. What exactly is pseudoscience?
So it's essentially when someone tries to pass off biased ideas as scientific fact,
Okay.
like saying that one race is inherently superior to another based on, say, skull measurements.
Oh, which brings us to Samuel George Morton.
Ah, yeah.
His book, Crania Aegyptica, was hugely influential at the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Wasn't he the one who used those skull measurements to argue for racial hierarchies?
That's the one. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, his ideas had this long-lasting and harmful impact. But Smith refused to let these dangerous theories go unchallenged. And his efforts went beyond these academic debates.
Mm.
He was the head physician at the Colored Orphan Asylum.
Wow.
And he used his work there to directly contradict those who claimed that black children were doomed to a future of stagnation and dependence.
So he was fighting back against these harmful stereotypes on multiple fronts, both intellectually but also, with his work in the community.
Absolutely. A man of action and intellect.
It's truly inspiring. But before we delve deeper into Smith's work at the Colored Orphan Asylum and his connection with a young boy named Omo, we need to turn our attention to Henry Highland Garnet and his own unique path to freedom.
So while James McCune Smith is tackling scientific racism, you have Henry Highland Garnet, who's taking a very different approach to challenging the status quo.
Right.
He's known for his fiery rhetoric and his calls for direct action against slavery.
Yes. I remember reading about his 1843 address to the slaves of the United States.
Oh, a powerful piece of writing.
It was a pretty radical call for slaves to rise up against their oppressors.
Oh, as it definitely ruffled some feathers.
Yeah, I bet.
Even Frederick Douglass, who, was a leading abolitionist figure, it initially felt that it was too extreme.
Wow. So even someone like Douglass considered it too radical.
It really shows you how committed Garnet was to achieving freedom, no matter the cost.
That's incredible. He was really willing to push the boundaries, even when it meant facing criticism from within the movement.
Absolutely.
But then just a few years later, he kind of does something that seems to contradict all of that.
You're talking about his shift towards supporting the American Colonization Society.
Yeah. The same organization that he'd previously criticized for wanting to send black people to Liberia?
Right.
I mean, how do you go from urging slaves to revolt to suggesting that they leave the country? It seems like such a complete 180.
It might seem like a contradiction, but I think it actually reflects this really difficult dilemma that many black people faced at the time.
Yeah.
Do you fight for equality in a nation that seems determined to deny you basic human rights? Or do you seek self-determination elsewhere, even if it means leaving behind everything you know?
That's a really tough question.
It is.
It's like you're caught between a rock and a hard place.
It is.
And I imagine this shift in Garnet's stance caused quite a stir within the abolitionist movement.
Oh, it definitely did. It created this major rift between Garnet and many of his former allies, including James McCune Smith, who remained dedicated to the fight for equality within America.
Wow.
So you have these two kind of competing philosophies of freedom playing out, right?
Right.
One advocating for this radical change within the existing system,
Yeah.
and the other seeking liberation through separation.
That's so fascinating. It just reminds us that even within movements fighting for a common goal, there can be these really passionate, complex disagreements about the best way forward.
Absolutely. And this tension between those different approaches to achieving freedom and equality continued to play out in the years leading up to the Civil War.
Right.
And a pivotal moment in this unfolding drama is John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859.
John Brown. He was a radical abolitionist who believed that armed insurrection was the only way to end slavery.
That's right.
And his raid on that federal armory at Harper's Ferry was a real turning point.
It was, absolutely.
It really was.
It intensified these already simmering tensions between North and South.
Oh, absolutely.
And it essentially pushed the nation closer to the brink of civil war.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that Brown's actions were deeply influenced by Garnet's earlier call to action.
So Garnet's words, even though they were controversial at the time, might have had a much broader impact than anyone anticipated.
It's like this ripple effect, where one person's ideas can spark a chain of events that lead to these major historical shifts.
And both Garnet and Smith, despite their different approaches to abolition, found themselves kind of caught in the crosshairs of this increasingly volatile political landscape.
Oh, absolutely. They faced heightened scrutiny, accusations of conspiracy, even threats to their safety.
It must have been a really dangerous time to be a black abolitionist, especially one with ties to someone as radical as John Brown.
Especially.
I mean, it's hard to even imagine the kind of pressure and fear that they must have experienced.
Absolutely.
It seems like the closer the nation got to war, the more dangerous their work became.
Absolutely.
And then, as if things couldn't get any worse, the New York City draft riots erupted in 1863.
The draft riots were just this horrifying display of racial violence.
It was.
White mobs fueled by anger over the Civil War draft and this deep resentment towards black people just rampaged through the city, targeting black neighborhoods, businesses, institutions.
I mean, it's unimaginable. This wasn't happening in some far-off southern state.
Right.
This is New York City, a place that was supposedly more progressive.
It's this stark reminder that even in the North, racial prejudice was very much embedded in society.
Yeah.
And tragically, one of the places targeted by the mob was the Colored Orphan Asylum.
Oh, no. The asylum, the very institution where James McCune Smith dedicated so much of his time and energy.
The very same.
What happened to the children?
It's a terrifying story. The mob surrounded the asylum, threatening to burn it to the ground with the children trapped inside.
Oh, my gosh.
But thankfully, due to the really courageous actions of the matron and other women who worked there, the children were led to safety through this secret passage.
Oh, thank goodness. I can't even imagine the terror those children must have felt. It's really a testament to the bravery of those women that they were able to protect them.
Absolutely. But the fact that the asylum, this place of refuge and care for these vulnerable children, was targeted at all, really speaks volumes about the level of hatred and violence directed toward black people during this period.
Right.
And both Garnet and Smith witnessed this firsthand, and it further solidified their beliefs about the urgent need for change.
It's incredible to think that they lived through such tumultuous times, facing constant threats and witnessing such horrific violence.
It is.
And yet they continued to fight for a better future.
Their resilience and dedication are truly remarkable.
They really are.
And despite their different approaches, both men lived to see the end of slavery and the dawn of this new era for black Americans.
Right.
And it's in this new era that Henry Highland Garnet achieves this milestone that would seem unimaginable just a few years earlier.
You're talking about his address to Congress in 1865.
That's right.
The first time a black man had ever been given such an honor.
Exactly. Just days after the passage of the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, Garnet stood before the U.S. Congress and delivered this powerful speech about freedom and equality.
Wow.
It was a culmination of his lifelong struggle for racial justice and a testament to the power of perseverance.
From escaping slavery as a child to addressing the very government that had once denied him basic human rights. I mean, it's almost poetic.
It is. It really is.
But I can't help but feel like there's a certain irony to this, considering his previous support for colonization.
Right. It's complex.
It is.
You have this man who once advocated for black people to leave America, now standing as a symbol of black achievement within the same nation. And to make it even more intriguing, he invites his friend and fellow colonization advocate Martin Delany to witness this historic event.
So even in this moment of triumph, that shadow of colonization, that debate over the best path to black liberation was still present.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It reminds us that history is rarely simple or straightforward.
Yeah.
And as we move into discussing the legacies of both Garnet and Smith, it's important to keep in mind those complexities and contradictions that shape their lives and the ongoing struggle for racial justice in America.
You know, it's incredible to think about everything that Henry Highland Garnet and James McCune Smith lived through.
It really is.
I mean, they faced slavery, they navigated this really complex education system.
Right.
They even witnessed that horrific violence during the draft riots.
Absolutely.
And yet, you know, through it all, they kept fighting for a better future, not only for themselves, but also for their communities.
Yeah.
But I have to ask, like, how do their stories, which happened so long ago, connect with us today? What can we learn from them?
Well, I think their lives provide this really powerful lens for understanding the complexities of black history and the ongoing fight for racial justice in America. You know, think about those draft riots that just tore New York City apart.
Oh, right.
They weren't just this random act of violence.
Right. Yeah.
They were fueled by this deep-seated racial prejudice, this economic inequality issues that are unfortunately still present in our society today.
That's a sobering thought. It seems like even though we've made progress in some areas,
Absolutely.
a lot of the same challenges still persist.
Did you?
Do their lives offer any guidance on how to address those challenges?
I think so, yeah. Garnet and Smith's stories really remind us that the fight for equality, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
It requires resilience. It requires unwavering commitment and a willingness to challenge the status quo, even when it feels really dangerous to do so.
You know, and they both faced tremendous adversity, yet they never gave up.
Never.
You know, each in their own way, they worked to uplift their communities,
Absolutely.
to advocate for a better future. It's really inspiring.
It is.
But their stories also really highlight the importance of education
Oh, absolutely.
as this tool for empowerment.
A tool for liberation.
Yeah.
They both understood that knowledge was essential for dismantling those racist ideologies.
Hmm.
Garnet used his powerful oratory to really rally crowds and inspire action,
Right.
while Smith used his meticulous research to kind of debunk these harmful myths and promote a more accurate understanding of Black history.
It's like they were using different tools, but working towards the same goal
Absolutely.
to create a more just and equitable world.
Yeah, and not just consuming knowledge,
Right.
but sharing it,
Yeah.
using their voices to challenge injustice, advocate for change.
Absolutely. But we also have to acknowledge, there are different approaches to achieving those goals.
Right.
Garnet was this fiery activist
Right.
calling for immediate and radical change,
Yes.
while Smith worked within established systems to create more lasting impact. So it's not about saying one approach is better than the other,
Right.
right? They both contributed to the dismantling of slavery, the advancement of Black rights,
Absolutely.
but in different ways.
In different ways, yeah.
And I think their divergent paths really reflect that range of strategies and ideologies within the abolitionist movement.
Absolutely.
And they remind us that there are many ways to fight for justice.
And sometimes even the most dedicated advocates can find themselves at odds with each other,
Right.
as we saw with Garnet's shift towards supporting the American Colonization Society.
It's interesting because that debate still resonates today,
Right now.
Should we focus on reforming existing systems or
Right.
building new ones? Should we strive for integration or self-determination?
Such complex questions.
There are no easy answers, it seems.
Right. And each approach has its own complexities.
Yeah,
But what remains crucial is the need for dialogue,
yeah.
the need for understanding, and a willingness to work together even when we don't always see eye to eye.
Just like Garnet and Smith, despite their differences, they were ultimately united in their goal
Absolutely.
to create a world where Black people could live free from oppression.
And I think their stories offer both inspiration and caution. They inspire us with their courage, their intellect, their dedication to justice.
Right.
But they also caution us against complacency.
It's a reminder that the fight for equality is ongoing.
Absolutely.
And it requires, vigilance and this willingness to challenge injustice whenever and wherever we see it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, I
Yeah.
want to leave you with a final question.
Okay.
What can we learn from Garnet and Smith's struggles and their triumphs to build a better future for ourselves and for generations to come?
Their stories remind us that the pursuit of equality is this collective endeavor, that each of us has a role to play in creating a world that truly embodies the ideals of freedom and justice for all.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the extraordinary lives of Henry Highland Garnet and James McCune Smith. We hope their stories have kind of sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue exploring the complexities of history and the ongoing fight for a more just and equitable world.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better tomorrow.